Imagine a city once bustling with life, now submerged under 20 feet of water, as thousands desperately cling to rooftops, watching their homes and dreams vanish without a trace. This was the reality in 1927, the year the Great Mississippi Flood struck with unparalleled ferocity. It stands as one of the most devastating natural disasters in U.S. history, a cataclysm that forever altered the lives of countless Americans. In the spring of 1927, a combination of severe weather unleashed an onslaught of rain. The Mississippi River, already swollen from heavy snowfall melting in the north, swelled beyond its banks. By April, torrents continued to pour over the delta, saturating the ground until it could absorb no more. Each storm compounded the misery, transforming fields into lakes and towns into ghostly shadows lurking beneath the surface of chaotic waters. Amid this natural aggression, human decisions significantly influenced the scale of the disaster. Flood control policies, designed to protect communities, had become a double-edged sword. The levees were simultaneously our guardians and our miscalculators. They promised safety, but led to hubris. As engineers expanded these barricades, they failed to foresee the consequences of pushing the river beyond its natural confines. Neglect and complacency marked their maintenance, and as a result, the levees weakened. May 1927 marked the true turning point. As water levels rose, the continent held its breath. Suddenly, the seemingly unyielding levees began to buckle. One by one, they ruptured under the weight of the water, sending torrents rushing into the very heart of towns. Whole communities were swallowed whole, their citizens left grappling with despair. What once was fertile land teemed with life became an ocean of devastation. This disaster highlighted a painful truth. The voices of the powerless were drowned out by the decisions of the powerful. Rural areas, primarily inhabited by poor African American families, bore the brunt of this tragedy. Their pleas for equitable flood management often went unheard, while wealthier areas received greater attention and resources. As floodwaters ravaged the landscape, the inequity became starkly apparent. The better off were more mobile. They fled to safety, while their poorer neighbors remained stranded, abandoned to face the furious river alone. In the aftermath, the U.S. government was forced to confront its failures. The flood drew national attention, not only for the scale of devastation it caused, but for the glaring disparities in how the response was handled. Temporary refugee camps sprouted across the region, housing thousands who lost everything. Scandals erupted over corruption and mismanagement as profits were prioritized over the well-being of the vulnerable. The flood exposed the chasm between the elite and the destitute, spotlighting an uncomfortable reality. The greed and negligence of the powerful worsened the suffering of the poor. But the deluge would not just leave physical scars. It would shape policies for years to come, raising questions about infrastructure, accountability, and social justice. As the floodwaters receded, the Great Repair began, but not without one crucial revelation looming in the background. How could a nation rebuild when the very systems designed to protect its citizens had failed them so profoundly? What transformative decisions would emerge from these ruins? The answer, still hanging in the balance, is a story that is just beginning to unfold. As the waters of the Great Mississippi Flood rose, they engulfed towns and cities, leaving devastation in their wake. New Orleans stood at the edge, a vibrant metropolis now holding its breath as the levees strained under nature's relentless assault. St. Bernard Parish, often considered a quiet enclave, became a harrowing tableau of despair. Entire neighborhoods vanished. Homes that once radiated warmth were reduced to mere outlines under a vast, muddy expanse. In the wake of the flood, the human toll was staggering. An estimated 700 lives were lost, but beyond the grim statistics were the stories of families torn apart. Days turned into weeks as survivors clung to rooftops, desperately awaiting rescue. Each hour marked the loss not just of property, but of identity, cherished memories washed away in a relentless tide. For many, this disaster was not merely a natural calamity. It served as a stark reminder of societal inequities. African American communities bore the heaviest burden. While affluent neighborhoods had the means to fortify their homes and enacted quicker recovery strategies, the marginalized faced systemic neglect. Shelters intended for the displaced were often overcrowded, poorly managed and lacking basic necessities. Discrimination ran rampant as racial dynamics dictated aid and resource distribution. The displacement of families was catastrophic. Whole generations were uprooted, leaving behind not only homes but lifelong networks of support. Schools, places of worship, and local businesses stood abandoned or submerged, creating voids that would take years to fill if they ever could. The pilfering waters did not discriminate, yet the response to the disaster clearly did. In the chaos, heroic efforts arose from unexpected quarters. Many white citizens, driven by compassion, risked their safety to assist their African American neighbors. But these acts, while commendable, were seldom enough to offset the staggering societal disparities laid bare by the floodwaters. Inequities that had simmered beneath the surface were exposed, forcing a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about race, poverty, and power. As the flood receded, the struggle began anew. Families returned to find nothing but mud and debris where their lives once flourished. The rebuilding process revealed just how deep the fault lines had been. Displaced communities contended not only with loss, but with the realization that they were fighting against a system that had long ignored their needs. Political leaders and bureaucrats, often shielded by wealth and privilege, seemed unconcerned by the plight of those who had been left behind. The stage was set for a reckoning. The flood sparked protests, demands for accountability, and the recognition that existing flood management policies disproportionately favored the wealthy. Activism surged, igniting social movements that would challenge the status quo. A national conversation about infrastructure, aid distribution, and civil rights was on the horizon. As attention turned toward rebuilding, one critical question loomed. Would the lessons learned from this disaster lead to meaningful change, or would history repeat itself, leaving the most vulnerable to face the next catastrophe alone? The decision lay in the balance, and time was running out. The catastrophic waters of the Mississippi River receded, leaving behind a landscape scarred by tragedy. Where vibrant towns once thrived, desolation reigned. As the floodwaters dropped, the reality of government response unfolded, revealing a tale of negligence amid desperation. In the wake of the disaster, local and federal governments sprang into action, but their response often fell short. The establishment of relief agencies was intended to be a beacon of hope, but delays in mobilizing aid only deepened the suffering. Time and time again, reports poured in from across the devastated areas, detailing the slow and often chaotic distribution of critical resources. With each passing day, the death toll grew, the result of not just the flood, but of bureaucratic red tape that snuffed out lives. Wealthy politicians and landowners found themselves at the center of decision-making processes. Their interests often eclipsed the needs of the most vulnerable, as powerful voices drowned out cries for equity. Despite clear needs in marginalized communities, the allocation of resources reflected a shocking negligence. Federal aid was often diverted to protect farms and businesses belonging to the affluent. The ripple effects were devastating. Families who had already lost everything waited in vain for help while politicians prioritized their backers' interests. The American Red Cross stepped in, a surge of hope amidst the chaos. They arrived with an arsenal of supplies, food, clothing, and shelter. But even this noble effort was fraught with challenges. Distribution became a whirlwind of confusion, with aid often reaching those who needed it least. Reports emerged of supplies being stockpiled in distant warehouses, while families sat on rooftops or crowded makeshift camps with little more than the clothes on their backs. Mismanagement was rampant. Supplies intended for the poorest often found their way into the hands of those who could easily purchase what they needed, further fueling resentment in the disaster-stricken regions. As the flood receded, so too did the clarity of need, merging with the fog of neglect. The poor, already living on the fringes, faced a crisis that revealed deep-seated inequalities. While the Red Cross initially sought to help, its efforts sometimes crumbled under the weight of logistical failures. African American communities, particularly hard hit, saw little in the way of equitable aid. Shelters became overcrowded, with reports of individuals being turned away simply because of their skin color. Anger and despair simmered. Those who had lost everything began to demand accountability. Protests erupted, with cries for reform and flood management policies ringing louder by the day. Activists question not only the adequacy of relief measures, but also the willingness of those in power to address the glaring disparities laid bare by the flood. In this heated atmosphere, looming questions took shape. Was this a turning point, a moment of reckoning for an America that had long ignored its marginalized citizens? Or would these devastating floods wash away hopes for meaningful change, as the voices of the voiceless remained submerged beneath the waters of indifference? As the nation began to grapple with the aftermath, a crucial question lingered. Would the lessons learned from this disaster lead to real reform, or would history repeat itself, leaving the most vulnerable once again at the mercy of the powerful? The Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 didn't just wash away homes and livelihoods. It reshaped the very fabric of American society. In the wake of the disaster, the staggering loss brought the nation's attention to the systemic inequities that often lay hidden beneath the surface. The flood exposed the stark reality for hundreds of thousands, disparities that went beyond mere geography. Wealth and influence dictated the allocation of aid, while marginalized communities were left to fend for themselves amid rising waters. In the months following the flood, the nation grappled with its conscience. Reports flooded in, detailing the gross mismanagement of relief efforts and the failure of government agencies. Politicians who once stood in front of the cameras promising relief now faced outrage from constituents demanding accountability. The Mississippi River, having surged with a ferocity that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, also stirred an awakening, a recognition that the neglected voices of the poor could no longer be silenced. This moment of reflection catalyzed societal change. Communities began to organize, rising in power and number. The disenfranchised demanded their rights, understanding that their survival hinged on political reform. Grassroots movements blossomed, and new leaders emerged from the rubble of despair, advocating for better government response and flood control systems. Simultaneously, the inequities faced by African American communities became impossible to ignore. The American Red Cross's failure to provide equitable assistance played a critical role in spurring civil rights activism. Black families found themselves not only displaced, but denied the resources afforded to their white neighbors. The seeds of discontent grew into a wider civil rights movement, transforming the struggle for basic human dignity into a bold demand for equality. This flood laid bare the glaring inadequacies of the U.S. government's ability to protect its citizens, especially the most vulnerable. It prompted an overhaul in flood control policies, leading to the establishment of the Flood Control Act of 1928. This legislation tasked the federal government with the responsibility of managing river basins and protecting lives and property. For the first time, the federal government acknowledged its role in disaster preparedness. Yet, these changes came with their own set of challenges. As authorities implemented flood control measures, the focus remained disproportionately on the protection of agricultural land and wealthy interests, risking the livelihoods of those living in marginalized areas. Massive levees built to protect elite landowners often funneled floodwaters into poorer neighborhoods, inadvertently further entrenching inequality. Decades later, the lessons of the Great Mississippi Flood would echo during future disasters, including Hurricane Katrina. American attitudes towards disaster preparedness shifted as communities began to recognize the necessity of equitable resource distribution. The flood didn't just alter landscapes, it transformed how people viewed governmental responsibilities. But not everyone benefited equally in this reshaping of policies. As communities adapted and grew stronger in the wake of the destruction, lingering questions remained. Would the hard-won reforms truly protect the most vulnerable, or would history repeat itself with new faces and new floods? As new storms approach and climate change continues to loom, the haunting shadow of the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927 begs one crucial question. Are we prepared to learn from our past, or are we destined to repeat it?